Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Marketplace Report by Handmade Seller Magazine. I'm your host, Amber Christian, and today I am pleased to welcome Lisa from Untangled to the show. So, thank you so much for joining us today, Lisa, and can you provide an introduction about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for having me. So my name is Lisa. I run Indie Untangled. The URL is indieuntangled.com. And it's a marketplace, so to speak. It's mainly a platform for uh, dyers of yarn, so independent yarn dyers, as well as anyone who makes accessories, so project bags, stitch markers, also knit and crochet pattern designers for fiber crafters.
Mhm. All right, so tell us a little bit about how did Indie Untangled get started? Give us the origin story of where it all began.
Sure. So I started knitting around 2007. And yeah, I was kind of an on and off knitter for a few years, and then got an invitation to the website Ravelry, and
Mm,
that was so that's a pattern marketplace. Also has forums, and found like a local knit group through it, and that just kind of started me down the rabbit hole of indie dyed yarn, and also visiting one of my local yarn shops. I live in New York City, and there was a shop that sold Madeline which now they're like a pretty mainstream brand. But back then, it was the founder, I believe her name was Amy, and she was basically just dying in her kitchen. um, had an Etsy shop, and then that morphed into a larger business. So one of my local stores sold their yarn, and yeah, that was kind of like the gateway. And through my one of my local knitting groups, just heard about all these other dyers, heard about the New York Sheep and Wool Festival and Rhinebeck, and that it just started me down this path of getting into this art form. So about, I guess, like six or so, yeah, like 6 or so years later. So I worked as a newspaper reporter. I worked for daily newspapers up in Connecticut, and I was laid off. The newspaper industry is very volatile,
mhm,
and I was doing some freelance writing. And I remember, so I was on one of the Ravelry forums, and there were some folks. One was a project bag maker. There were some other dyers. They were talking about Etsy and like the challenges of standing out there. So that, I mean, this was years ago, back when, like, I think it was like right before they had started relaxing the rules on what was considered handmade, and obviously with
mhm,
a move, an eye toward going public. Um, they were just increasing the number of sellers, and so I was reading these. I guess they were just making various changes. I was just reading this, and like a light bulb kind of went over my head. I'm like, there should be something like this for hand dyed yarn. Like I use Ravelry to keep track of. They call them shop updates. So a lot of Etsy shops. I don't know if people really had. Not a lot of dyers had their own websites, or if they did, it was like Big Cartel or something like that,
mhm.
because at that point it was a lot more difficult to build one. So yeah, so I would find out about shop updates like either through my friends or on Ravelry forums, and then there would be some dyers whose yarn would sell out like within 5 minutes. And that, or yeah, there'd be like this special collaboration, be like it's open for limited orders for like a half hour. um, so you'd have to like plan your day around getting this. So yeah, so it made me think about like just like Ravelry kind of brought together crafters and provided a marketplace of patterns. I thought that there should be more of that kind of platform for yarn dyers. So yeah, so this was like around this time in 2013, and then just kind of went started looking into how that would come to be. So just looking at like platforms that were already created that I could customize, or like looking for a technical co-founder, like somebody that could actually build a site. Um, in the end, I decided, so I didn't have the technical skills to build
Sure.
something like that, and I couldn't really make the investment in something completely new, and then just hope that the dyers would follow. And actually, in retrospect, it was a very smart decision because there are just so many challenges that come with running a marketplace. As I'm sure like sales tax for one. A lot of states have marketplace facilitator laws. So if you run an online marketplace, you have to handle sales tax for all of your sellers, and that's, I mean, that a small business, it's hard enough doing it for I sell in New York, and it's enough work to have to do that for my sales in one state. So anyway, I ended up hiring Aolidia, which is a design and development firm. They had designed a website of a dyer that I really liked, and then they worked with me to create like a custom site. So it works like a social media platform or a blog in
Mm.
a way, and
Hmm.
the sellers will fill out a form, basically just like publishing a post with a number of images, and then that gets published to the site after I review it.
So your marketplace isn't like a traditional marketplace, which
Right.
you're absolutely right. Marketplaces are not cheap. And that's part of why a lot of them have fees, or people with technical backgrounds build them, especially, because marketplaces have the two-sided equation, right? For the buyers and the sellers, and you have to have full functionality for both sides. So if you really do embark on that marketplace, it's there's a lot. Like sales tax compliance is a perfect example for a
Mm-hmm.
consumer platform. If you were to have done a more traditional marketplace, you'd have to be compliant in the sales tax laws of all of the states. So instead, it sounds like what you've built is more like a marketplace facilitation mechanism, basically. So you can surface all of the products without actually technically recording the sale. Is that
Yes,
correct? Okay.
that's, yeah,
And so a
exactly.
seller on your platform would actually create one of these posts and they submit it. And then do you review it, or how does that work? And then
Yeah,
and then
so
you
I'll review
basically approve.
everything. Yeah,
Mhm.
make sure all the links work, or if it's the right link. Like, so I have the form they fill out. They put in their URL, but a lot of the time, so the way I designed it and the way I envisioned it working, and the way it really works best is when someone has something specific that they're selling. So I do have, plenty of introduction posts like, hey, I
Mhm.
dye yarn based on or inspired by video games, like, come check out my site. But I think, especially, I realize what resonates with me and what resonates with my fellow crafters is really that single, call to action. So, like, if somebody's coming out with a new series of yarns inspired by something, or like a big thing, or like these holiday countdown boxes. So if
Mhm.
they're opening up orders for that, so I'll usually ask the dyer or other seller to create like one URL to that product, and then so when someone clicks the button, they're taken directly to that listing.
Right. Otherwise, it's hard as a consumer. It sounds like the philosophy is, yeah, intro posts, they're okay, but that doesn't it's hard for a consumer to know what to do that with that
Yeah.
per se, where if you have a very specific product, that's much more either I like it or I don't, or I want to buy it or not. It's much easier to create that call to action if they have specific products. So now that's how a seller actually gets onto your platform. What kind of fees does a person pay to be part of your platform?
So there's a way that when I first started out, I made it so you just had to pay a very small fee. So the minimum spend is $2, and that's a post with a single photo, and then I send out and then so a subsequent post, so if they post with more than one image, so it's up to six, then the post is the cost of the post is $5. And then there are fees like $25 for a featured post, which that gets them higher up in the newsletter that I send out every Friday.
Mm.
And then featured posts also get posted on Instagram. So there, and then I have Instagram stories that they can upgrade to. There's also a way that they can be featured in the newsletter. So at the top of the newsletter I send out every Friday, I have kind of one main featured product, and then the subsequent products. And then I also have started a few years ago. I started memberships, so it's kind of a good bang for your buck, and then gets the seller in front of my audience more regularly, which leads to more sales. As they recognize the seller, dyer, or maker. And those are, so it's essentially $100 per year, and then they can post every week, so as much as they want.
So you have kind of two models going on, a little bit of an a la carte. The I can do an individual post if or maybe I'm trying it out. I'm not sure if I want to sign up for the membership. I want to try it out a little bit. So I can do an a la carte post, which just either goes out or is a featured one, just a couple different price points. And then, or I can decide I'm just going to go with I won't call it all you can eat buffet, but a membership with more in the buffet, with opportunities and things available, and then pay that annual fee as part of that. So it's really two different models that you've got going on, depending on where someone's entry point is, what they can afford for price, where they're getting started in the process.
Yeah, and I guess what they feel is like the something they really want to promote. Like they might have regular, regular, they dye regular batches, they have regular shop updates, but then like they're doing something really special. So maybe they have a membership and they'll post like every 2 weeks with like their regular offering. But then if they have like a holiday countdown box for sale, or like they're opening signups for a yarn club, that's when they might want to invest in like a more prominent post.
Okay. Very interesting. So now, when you first started, so when you were just a little baby marketplace facilitator, how did it work differently than how it does now as Indie Untangled? If you think back, or has it always kind of worked in the same way?
Yeah, I would say aside from the subscriptions, it's really worked the same way. I mean,
Mhm.
I've raised prices only slightly. I mean, my price point is pretty low to begin with, but like the I'm trying to remember. It was like a couple of dollars less, and then like the featured posts were $20. Now they're $25. Just
Mhm.
to as my following has increased, my reach has increased. I feel like the value has increased. So
Mhm.
I don't have like a structure, like okay, a plan, 5-year plan. Oh, I'm gonna increase by like this percentage. It's really just how I feel the marketplace is being utilized, and how the reach has increased. Um, and I would say, yeah, like I added the newsletter feature. I guess a few years ago, like when it first started. So essentially, when I started, I reached out to a huge list of dyers, just that I'd come across, or so on Ravelry, in one of the forums that I was a part of, there was just always discussions about different dyers, and I was just constantly being introduced to new ones. Um, and so I made a list, and would reach out either via email or direct message on Ravelry, and tell them about my site, pitch it. And then when I launched the site in April of 2014, it was with an eye towards, I had a number of of business owners who are already a part of the platform.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then,
So,
yeah, so now it's more people finding me, and it's crazy. Just, um, for those in your audience who aren't as familiar with the yarn world, it's just incredible how vast it is. That there are just like new dyers that I'm hearing of every day.
because things change and people come up with new techniques or new ways of doing it, or there's new materials and like things to work with. It's a constant evolutionary process. And so, you're if you aren't always learning something, that's usually a flag. There should be some nuance in that
Oh
always
yeah,
learning and growing. It doesn't mean you necessarily aggressively have to, but it's just sort of a constant. And even when you've been there years, it is shocking how many people are like, "Who's that? Oh, I haven't heard of them." And
right,
I'm like, "Oh, I've just
exactly.
been over here doing my thing for years." Um, so now, in terms of, so the marketplace has been around for quite a while now.
Hmm.
If you were to think through, you've talked a lot about the seller side of it, and you come across them through other sites and other outreach, but how have you thought about your process for bringing buyers to the site? Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, so I when I launched, I knew that a newsletter was going to be a big component. I had a background as a writer, and that was just a key. That was always going to be a key element, and that just that personal connection. I mean, just in general, when you're talking about handmade sellers, that's really a given because the one of the big buy-ins or like reasons that business owners are supported is because they create that personal touch, and it's art coming from them. So I knew I always wanted that personal component, and I think yeah, like over the years, a lot of sellers are, it's pretty much Instagram and Facebook, and those are like their avenues. And there are a lot of sellers who do have great newsletters, but I think that I see that as something that's lacking with a lot of sellers. And I would just urge anyone who considers opening a handmade business, like have a newsletter. Like, that's always going to be your something you own. It's going to really uh, show the direction of your business, and so you don't have to depend on the algorithms. And so yeah, that's a key message. And it helps you connect with buyers. So I mean, really, I mean, probably most like traditional business owners wouldn't say to like create a business for yourself or your friends, but really that's the customer that I understood was me, and the people who, I'd go to knit night every week, and they'd be just, we'd be talking about like, oh, did you see that yarn? Did you see that yarn? And oh, this person is having a shop update, and oh, they're going to be at Rhinebeck. Um, and yeah, so I always had, who I was serving in mind when I created the marketplace. So the newsletters is key to that, and then also, I guess a big part of what makes Indie Untangled different. So also in 2014, I launched an in-person marketplace. So there's the New York Sheep and Wool Festival up in Rhinebeck. I had been going for a few years. Like groups of friends would go, like they'd rent rooms in a hotel, and it was just a thing. And a lot of people in our community did that. They'd rent houses. So after I launched my business, I was thinking like I have to do something. It's this huge event. Everyone in my community is descending on this. It felt like, or is descending on upstate New York. I need to do something to sort of like debut my business. And it just occurred to me like, oh, I can have a, so the festival it has vendors, has, sheep shearing demonstrations, sheep auctions. But on the Friday night, when people were traveling from all around, they would gather. at least our group would gather at the hotel, and there were a few dyers and project bag makers in our group, and they would bring stuff for us. So we'd have like a little mini, trunk show before the gates open, and you're kind of let loose in this huge fairgrounds. And I thought it would be nice to have like a kind of more intimate, like one to one, just yeah, getting to meet and really see these products in person that most people were buying online. So yeah, so I started that in 2014. It was at the hotel, in a meeting room in the hotel where we were staying, and it was like 200 to 250 people. 250 people showed up, and yeah, it was just people recognized, like, or they just didn't realize, like, oh, this is like the perfect way to start off the weekend. So that's the way I connect with sellers, is really looking for ways that I can fill a need. So finding things like that people did. It's not so much like, oh, I didn't know I wanted it, but just like some things in the air, and I'm like trying to make that more tangible.
And as we had gotten into even before we hit the record button, a lot of the organic ways you've grown your business with the marketplace, with some of these additional events, have really been about seeing a problem that
Hmm.
exists and solving it, not forcing it. And so your business to me is interesting because it hasn't been a, well, now strategically I'm adding this and I'm going to add this and these are my revenue goals and
Yeah.
this is what I'm pushing toward. But it's the, well, let's solve this problem. And as you look around at other potentially adjacent problems to kind of that core thing that you solve, and then say, oh, maybe we need to go solve this problem.
Hmm.
And then that adds another revenue stream. So speak a little
Yeah.
bit more about some of your thought processes and how that's led to kind of organic growth of your businesses, because I think that's a very interesting topic.
Yeah, so along with the marketplace, a big part of my website is my own e-commerce platform. So I started the website on the WordPress platform, because that was the best way for the best platform for the marketplace. So it functions essentially like a
Mhm.
WordPress blog, where the sellers will fill out the form. They'll submit it, and then it will become a draft blog post that I essentially edit and then post. And then um, as my business grew, and I was working with all these dyers, just kind of thinking of ideas like, oh, I would love to see a yarn, that's like inspired by the national parks. So I came up with the Knitting Our National Parks project,
Mm.
and so I have it's a hybrid WordPress and Shopify website,
Mhm.
and so I partner with dyers, many of whom I only learned about because they started posting to the marketplace, and then they'll choose a photo of the national parks from Instagram. From the U.S. Interior Department has a really amazing Instagram feed, either photos taken by like park rangers or parks employees, and or they get contributed photos from amateur and professional photographers. And so I began selling those on my site. I have a yarn club, so I pair together a dyer and a designer, and they collaborate on a special color and a pattern. And also in that way, it's helped me understand buyers a little bit more, and what they're looking for. And then also one of the things, so as a yarn collector myself, I realized, starting, I think, like back in 2018 or 2019, some dyers had started having their own custom milled yarns. A lot of those yarns. So, not to get too into the weeds, but a lot of hand dyed yarn is dyed on what's called superwash yarns, and that's
Mhm.
mostly merino, but other wool yarns that have been treated in order to, so when you wash wool, you agitate it too much or the heat is too high, it will felt. So this treatment helps protect that. So like technically you could throw a knit blanket or something in the washing machine, although you should always be delicate with washing your hand knits. Um, but dyers had started to create custom yarns with non-superwash, so essentially wool that hasn't been treated. They can use different sheep breeds, and so the yarn is also um, sourced from more local farms and milled more locally. So instead of like the supply chain for superwash yarns, I think is very global. And just in general, we're trying to pare that down. So naturally, a lot of dyers have been gravitating towards breed specific yarns, and I found that I was gravitating towards those because they're more unique. And seeing that in a hand dye just makes that even more special. Um, and the artisan just has a greater hand in the process. So then I launched the Heritage Wool Collective subscription, and that's another way. So it's me collaborating with dyers. We work together and kind of figure out like what kind of yarn they want to uh, work on. And then also there's a challenge of dyers, like any handmade seller, wanting to stand out among increased competition. A lot of them are looking for different bases. Some dyers have already they've like ordered custom yarns from some mills around the US. It's a very expensive process because a lot of mills have very high minimums, and it's a very inventory heavy business. And it's a delicate balance that a lot of dyers have of having enough stock on hand to either fulfill orders or dye new stock, but then also, balancing that with keeping, being able to pay their bills, not having all their money invested in tons of undyed yarn. So this
Right.
way kind of helps them so they can try out a different base and then decide whether they want to order more or work with that mill to create something custom.
hmm And so it strikes me that a lot of the way you've approached business is you've looked at this core thing, yarn, and you've gone very deep into a whole series of problem sets around yarn and just looked around and said, why doesn't this exist? Why doesn't this exist? And it's kind of just a very natural process over time, and then creating those products to fill the gaps where other things didn't exist. I think that's a way to then you don't have to second guess, oh, gee, should I add anything to my business? Like, no, I'm solving another problem. I just have to balance it out with my existing businesses, which is, I think, a comfortable way to grow as opposed to feeling like you've really forced it
Oh
upon
yeah.
yourself.
No, I mean, I've looked into. I think there was maybe someone in the craft industry lines had enrolled in the Goldman Sachs like 10,000 small
Mm.
businesses program, and I looked into that. So I think their like original program launched in New York City.
Mhm.
So I applied for. I think it was like post pandemic, like the first in person one post pandemic. Um, and I'm not sure, and I didn't get in, and I wasn't too upset, but kind of it made me think about like think these businesses or this program was more focused on businesses that want to have at least one full-time employee and wanted to like grow into more like a job creation company. And like I have respect for that. I think that's a, a goal of any business. But I think um, for my comfort level, I'm I'm more comfortable growing slowly and kind of dipping my toe into things. If I'm really confident that something will go well, I don't hesitate to invest in it. Um, but it's just, yeah, I don't necessarily have like 5 year plans or like I want to, hire X number of employees. It's really, my business exists to to serve this market. And it's not necessarily, I don't feel comfortable, forcing myself into a growth path that won't work for me.
Hmm. So now, if you were to think back through all the different kinds of posts that people submit to go through your marketplace, what makes, in your experience, a good listing or something more likely to be picked up or acted upon by the buyers in your marketplace? Can you speak some more to that?
Yeah, I would say definitely inserting yourself into this, your promotion as much as possible and to try to create a connection point. So if you're, yeah, like there have been great promotions. Like there was a group of dyers, I think like 4 or 5 from the Colorado area, and they'd work together to have this like yarn from Navajo Churro sheep, and so like, and each one of them dyed a color, and they were selling it as a set. And that was like they approached the I think it was like one dyer who facilitated the promotion through the Indie Untangled marketplace. But I think, yeah, something like that really resonates with people, where they can just see the thought that was put into the process of developing the product. And um, or yeah, like if it's a holiday box and it's inspired by like someone's favorite holiday movie, um, that's a way. And even if like, I haven't seen that, I can still like their passion for that particular project comes through. And I always try to encourage, so like when a seller posts to the marketplace, and I'll approve posts where it's written in the third person. um,
Mhm.
but I just find that a post or listing will resonate when somebody speaks in the first person and talks about
Mhm.
their own connection to the product, because as a shopper, that's always going to move me a little more, um, someone's personal story behind the
Mhm.
product.
And so for yours, it's about have a personality,
Mhm.
basically. Have a backstory, a
Yes,
personality, and don't be afraid to share your personality. And everybody has them. They just sometimes get so caught up in, well, I want it to look a certain way that that personality doesn't shine through, but that personality is the very thing that the buyers on your site are looking for is, no, I
exactly.
actually show your quirk, as we
Yeah.
say.
And
You know?
there's, yeah, I mean, there's tons of, and in our conversation, we touched before we were recording, we touched a little bit on AI and how that's, coming into play. And I'm all for AI in terms of like how, it's helpful, but I don't see it as a replacement for that personal touch. And a lot of, I see in general. So I still do a little freelance journalism, and I'm in some freelancer groups on Facebook, and it's just this, like, we're in the midst of this huge transition, where businesses are like, we need to lean into AI, but then they're not sure exactly how. And so like I wouldn't necessarily recommend using AI to write product listings. I mean, like, it can be a good tool, like especially if you're not comfortable as a writer, it can you know, um, help give you ideas. But I would say try to shy away from using that, because that is not going to help you stand out. And
Mm.
buyers are, I guess anyone could be fooled, but I think buyers are just, they're good at detecting, I think, insincerity. And so just, yeah, leaning into, um, to having a personality, like you said, and just and keeping that personal connection with your making process and with your products. I mean, I'm very well versed in the yarn industry, but I buy tons of other things. For example, like there's a dress company, Pine and Smith. They're based in California. The owner, Joanna, she started, I guess, selling it like in person, farmers market type marketplaces, and then her business has evolved, and she has models modeling her dresses, not just her, but you could tell that the vision is hers. Like she designs the fabrics and she curates other products like shoes and socks and like leggings, things that she likes and that she likes to wear like with her dresses. And so it's like the experience of browsing and shopping on the Pine and Smith site is just, it's so different from going to a store or just like even looking on the online shop of a big seller where there's a cohesive collection and you can really connect to that, and also a lot of knitters are, that's how I found out about this dress line. And so there's that connection point. It's like, oh, I could buy that dress and like I have yarn that match, coordinates with it, and I could knit like a vest to wear with this dress. And so that like I click buy because I've just there's that cohesive vision in mind when like their new line is being launched.
Hmm. So now, if we think about, marketplaces, and a lot of artisan businesses, they may have their own website, but they might also be on marketplaces. And so I always think it's important for people that run these to actually share, how should someone decide what marketplaces to be part of? What advice would you give them? What would you tell them to think about before they settle in on their marketplace strategy?
Yeah, so I would think about where your customers are. So I think in my industry, that's Etsy was always really where what people thought of. It's where a lot of like the larger yarn companies, so like Madeline Tosh, for example, that's where they got started. And Etsy's definitely evolved over the years, but there are a lot of sellers of hand dyed yarn. I'm not as familiar with other handmade marketplaces, but I think and it's also like so I understand choosing a marketplace because building your own website can be time consuming, also a large investment. So if you don't have a few $1,000s to invest in building a website, or the time yourself to invest in building a website, yeah, I would look at where you think your customers would go, um, what kind of work the marketplace does on its own to attract customers. I would say so. Etsy, there have been critiques, and Untangled started in a way to respond to the changes there. But I still have always felt that they have the expertise to really handle what sellers are looking for. Like as a buyer myself, it's like I want to be able to see when something ships. So having estimated ship dates, um, and yeah, being able to check out with multiple items in your carts. Maybe you're putting together a gift for someone. You want to throw in some extra things. Um, I guess I also I use Fair a lot. So Fair's a wholesale marketplace, and actually wholesale has become a pretty large part or large revenue stream, I guess, for Indie Untangled, which we could talk about a little later. But yeah, so fair again, just very clear on when your order is going to ship, what fees are involved, being able to check out with multiple things, um, and just I guess look at what kind of a shopping experience someone is going to have and how that aligns with your mission as a business owner. So like we were talking about before, you can look and say, oh, well, which marketplace has the lowest fee? That's not necessarily what you should be looking at because, a marketplace like Fair, I mean, I think their fee, and this is for wholesale, so much larger order numbers, or order amounts, but their fees are like something like 15%. Um, but they also, and Etsy has been doing this too, where if someone uses your personal link that you send them, then the fees are either zero or they're less because you referred the sale versus them being the referral source. So, and also I would try out, especially if you're just starting your business, I would try out a number of different marketplaces. Don't necessarily just stick with one. It's like, I sort of, I mean, I'm a like Gen X millennial, who used to go to the mall, and, it's not like you would go to the mall and like that would be the only place you could shop at that store. Like you could go to J. Crew elsewhere or the Gap elsewhere, and it's like there's not one location. So don't just stick with one one location. You should have multiple locations, and then ideally the marketplace platform that you choose, or the platforms you choose, will be a mix of you driving your own customers and then them also driving traffic.
Mhm. So let's talk a little bit more about FAIR since we haven't really gotten into that yet. So, how does tell me more about how Indie Untangle and FAIR work together? How does that all kind of set up?
So yeah, so I since I have an e-commerce platform, so I have a yarn club. I'll often shop on Fair. Like if I have a little handmade gift that I include with each yarn club installment that relates to the theme of that installment. So I'll often look on Fair for things, just so I'm not going back to the same makers every time, because that can be easy. Like, oh, I need a stitch markers. I'm going to go to this
Mhm.
maker, which is fine. Like, I have worked with people multiple times, but sometimes just looking for something different, or just something that fits the theme that people I've worked with in the past just couldn't meet. And then also, like, I've been running the last couple of years a retreat at Mount Rainier National Park. So I have goodie bags that go out, or gift bags that go out, and also I'll look on there for things that work. Um, but so one of the other parts of my business that I think will uh, apply to handmade sellers. So in I guess it was like around 2019 or 2020. I Since I had been working with dyers, buying from them wholesale, I was seeing the challenges they were having in growing their wholesale business. So they wanted to sell wholesale because that helped them. Having their yarn in a yarn shop helps them reach a customer that they can't reach. That they may have customers from all over the country, but a yarn shop is going to, a good yarn shop is really going to promote you to their customer base, either, in person, or if they have an e-commerce site themselves. So that really opens up your customer base as well. But since, especially handmade items, especially hand dyed yarn, it's very labor intensive. And so if they want to go to a trade show, for example, paying like, $3,000 for a booth, and all the related expenses, travel and fixtures, might not be the best idea, if you're only looking to take on, like, let's say, a half a dozen stores. Um, So in, I guess it was 2021. So it's sort of the midst of the pandemic, and I saw an opportunity to do a virtual trade show, especially
Mm.
since in-person ones weren't going on, especially not large enough to accommodate, you know, the numbers that someone would need to make the investment worth it. So yeah, so I did an online trade show. I put together sample boxes. So basically, it was like about 50 or so sellers. Not all of them participated in the sample box. I think a good amount did. So that got sent out to, I think it was over like 300 shops that signed up. And so, yeah, it was a way for, and then there was an online marketplace component, so that worked similarly to the regular marketplace, where they wrote up an introduction. They had photos, and then they laid out their wholesale terms. So whether it was 60% of retail, 50%, 70% of retail, it showed their next availability. So like when in the next calendar year would they be able to start taking orders, what their general turnaround time was, and that went really well. And then the following year, or I guess in the months leading up to the following year, H&H Americas, which I think
Mhm.
you've worked with
Yep.
before. So they announced that they were putting together a North American show. So their show was originally their craft show was wholesale show was originally in Cologne, Germany, and when so there's TNNA, which was an acronym for the National Needle Arts Network. They were basically the main trade or wholesale show for the yarn industry. And then during the pandemic, they folded. So H&H saw an opportunity. There was definitely an opening in the market for them to do this kind of a show. And when I heard that they were organizing it, I heard about it through Abby at the Craft Industry Alliance. I immediately contacted them and said, one of the things. So I'd gone to TNA a couple of times, and they did have a number of indie dyers there. I felt like it was increasing, but they were kind of scattered around the floor. You had to walk the whole floor in order to like find those particular sellers, and that could take a while because you meet people on the floor, you say hi, and then you lose track of time. So my proposal was to have a pavilion just for indie dyers. It would be a lower price point, smaller space, also, so they don't have to build out a whole 10 foot by 10 foot booth. And yeah, and have a place where they're all together. So if a yarn store is like, I really want to build up my stock of indie dyed yarn along with more mass produced yarn, they would know exactly where to go to find those, like those indies who are just getting started. And I guess I know as a shopper, and then also as a retailer, like people you're just looking for something that's new and different,
Mhm. Mhm.
um, something that will stand out from what you've been seeing for a while. So, yeah, so that was a way. It was, again, like a problem that I was looking to solve, and then just a natural expansion of what I do.
Mhm. So now, if you were to tell people how to apply to sell on your site, how do people find out more to sell on your site?
So they would go to indieuntangled.com, and then there's a menu tab for marketplaces, and then there's a drop down, and you can find more information about what the marketplace is all about. And then there's a submissions form, that I guess that submissions area, vendor submissions area, takes you to it shows the membership options, and then there's also a link to that a la carte form, so you can
Mhm.
try it out and see how it goes. I would always I do recommend posting a few times before deciding if it's the right fit. I will say that and I try to get feedback from the sellers. I don't always, it's usually them coming to me. I don't necessarily, you know, always take the initiative or like have the time to like email everybody and ask them. But I do see I do see the clicks. I don't always, I can't see necessarily how it translates into sales. But I
Mhm.
will say that most of the dyers and business owners who have posted do see a good response, and it's kind of similar. So dyers that do have their own newsletter say it's a very similar experience. Like I'll always say, have your own newsletter and sell yourself, and then you can see the return is very similar because people are responding to a very personal message.
Mhm. So now tell us the coolest thing you've ever seen sold through Indian Tangled. And this is totally
Yeah.
subjective. And there's no objective measurement of the coolest thing, but what struck you as, oh, that is so cool, something that
Oh
has sold on
wow.
your site?
Hmm. That's, I mean, I've purchased so many things. I guess the things I remember that have resonated with me are like the custom milled yarn. So like there are some UK sellers that have created like there's a mill there, John Arbon, and there was a Dyer kettle yarn co. And this was actually like kind of the earlier, yeah, it must have been 2015 or 2016. Like she was kind of ahead of the curve, and created a base with all pure British wool, and that, yeah, that was definitely, it's like it really opened my eyes to, oh my god, you can create such a, it's like it has such a different personality than what I was seeing.
Mhm,
Yeah, so I
mhm.
would say, yeah, it would take me a while. I'd have to really.
You have to keep digging. You're like, there's too many cool products.
Yeah,
It's like
I
picking
mean,
a favorite child. It's very hard.
exactly. Hmm.
So you're all about the custom milled products.
Yeah, and
Those
just
are your favorite.
anything that really just has. I mean, like early on, yeah, probably like the first year that I started India Tangle, there was a dyer, Amy of Cannon Hand Dyes, based in Oregon, and she yeah, I guess mostly dyes self striping yarn, which is it's pretty labor intensive. I remember she had a series of colors inspired by the films of Wes Anderson, and it was,
Mm.
yeah, it was just like, ooh, I have to like pick my favorite movie, and then, oh, but there's, or the yarn I gravitate towards like isn't a movie I've seen or something like that. So yeah, it definitely had that, personality behind it.
Mhm. And then, given that you're a marketplace facilitator, can anyone from any country be able to post things through your site? Because it's still all the actual e-commerce goes through their individual site. So anybody
Yes.
anywhere can do this.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So it's definitely global. Okay. So now, the last little bit before we wrap up here, how do people follow you on socials?
So it's Indie Untangled on Instagram and Facebook. And yeah, those are my main, those are my main social media accounts. So Indie Untangled, all one word. I guess on Facebook it might be, yeah, I think it's all one word. You
Mhm.
search for Indie Untangled on Facebook.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today, Lisa. It's been a pleasure getting to learn more about the platform and its history. And I think our audience will really benefit from what they've learned today. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Mhm. All right, thank you, everyone. And until next time, keep on assessing your marketplaces, and we'll see you next month.